two brewing guilds in Meridias, both of which collapsed because of inactivity. And we're trying to do it again.
Is the golden cask gone, or is it just trying to resurrect?
We're probably just going to start all the way over. Because Golden Cask made a good club, but not a good guild. So we're probably just going to start it over and try it again in a different way. But we'll see. We might just resurrect that one. I'm very ADD, so I tend to ramble. So I have things that will keep me from rambling too far off topic. Otherwise, I'm not drunk yet. So
Darn. Okay.
if I do get too far off topic, let me know.
It's like Curtis said, it ain't over.
Yeah, it ain't over till it's over.
No. Have you shot anybody, killed anybody yet, Curly?
They ain't over yet.
They ain't over yet.
So this is a brief history of consumable alcohol. There's a lot of skipping over a lot of big chunks that are common knowledge or commonly covered topics. So I decided to go as far back as we could possibly get into the 30,000 BCE range.
I remember that.
Yeah, 30,000 BCE. So we got some cave paintings. And cave paintings of people doing things that sober people don't do. So there's a big jump between doing what they're doing in the cave paintings, looks like celebrating, and being drunk. It's a big leap between having alcohol and exhibiting behaviors. So I don't consider that the beginning of intentional consumption of alcohol. I consider that happenstance. Were they? Probably. Birds do it, rabbits do it, squirrels do it. You eat fruit off the tree that happen to be fermented, you're gonna get drunk. You do it enough times from the right tree at the right time and you get drunk. That's probably what they're doing. They're not intentionally putting things together to become drunk. But they made cave paintings while they were drunk, so we have a history of consumption. Then we got the Neolithic site of, I cannot pronounce this in Chinese. By the way, I can't pronounce anything in Chinese. Jiayu in China, where we have found residue analysis has identified a fermented concoction of honey, rice, and fruit. We know that one was intentional. There were enough of the same recipes found in several different jars that all had the same type residue that there's no way that was an accident. So I call that intentional fermentation in 7,000 BCE.
Honey, rice, and what?
Honey, rice, and fruit, all in the same jar together.
Well, the interesting thing, if they had yeast, that's.
Well, they have yeast. Yeast is airborne. It's
Yeah.
everywhere. You don't have to do it on purpose.
Yeah, but if they did, if they didn't do it on purpose,
Yeah,
it's not really the same thing, but
right.
to me at least.
I've read several arguments about that particular set of jars, and to me, this looks like a recipe. To me, this looks like a recipe that has been followed several times and created similar results every time, and that to me is intention to create the same product repeatedly. That is intent, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not an anthropologist. Then we move on to 4,000 BCE, where we have the beginnings of mass production in Iran and Egypt. Beginning of the 4th millennium BCE, wine and beer were produced in many locations in Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Anatolia, such as the Ubaid site of Tepe Gawara, and treated as a trade and elite luxury good. At the same time, the pre-dynastic Egyptian tomb paintings and wine jars are evidence of the local production of herb-based beers. So by 4,000 BCE, we definitely have intentional production.
They have clay tablets in Samaria. They have fermentation beds or must beds, and they just found recently another cache that was like 1,000 years earlier. And that was can't remember the guy's name, it keeps slipping my head, but I got the books.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the name of it. I think it was Ancient Wine.
Now I've got some
You guys-
Umeri
the
One.
anthropologist?
Umeri One is the oldest known wine production. I have a card for that in here.
Yeah, I think they moved it back because they found another
Yeah.
site. And I can't remember
It'd be Umeri Two or Umeri Two.
I can't remember the guy's name, but it's let's see, anthropological botanist. And he's been the one studying the residue in the clay pots.
Yeah.
And but he found another one recently,
Oh, okay.
like 2 months ago.
Oh, wow, that's more recent than I have information.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
on the news. I cannot remember his name, but
Umeri One is the first one. I think it's Umeri, maybe Emery. I might have vowels. I've got a card because I'm bad at memory. But yeah, no, it's this ancient winery. There's no other purpose to this place but to be a winery, and it's about that old. It's about 4th century or 4000 BCE.
well, the Puritan in Kasi is making beer,
Yeah,
so
yeah. There's so much. I mean, anytime you have sugar put together, you got sugar, you got some kind of suspension solution of water. You put oxygen in there, you're gonna get yeast that are going to float in there. They're gonna do it. So right now the big argument is which came first, consumption or intention to consume. This is a big argument right now.
I would have to think.
You would have to think intentional consumption or accidental consumption.
Yeah.
Right.
Picking fruit off the tree that happens to be fermented
Yeah.
versus growing a fruit for the specific purpose of putting it into a beverage. There is a big argument right now that says, and this is new, this is within the last year, that has found rice or cereal grains in pre-ag culture. Proof of fermentation in that culture that led directly to their decision to stop and start planting their own grain. Do you wander around long enough until you can find grain and gather your grain? Or do you stay in one point and grow beer? And it's a big question right now because there's lots of fires. There's lots of shooting from both sides. And I like to say that if a culture is going to stop moving because it's easier to get beer here, I mean, I would move closer to a brewery if I had the option. Wouldn't you?
Not necessarily, but I do agree that would be one of the early things that if you had the technology,
Yeah.
would be, brewing and vintning. Brewing especially because vintning is based on, you can only do that one short
Right.
time of the year.
I'm more or less a capitalist. I believe that the brewery got near the people.
You put the brewery near the people, not the people near the brewery. I'm gonna believe, personally, that if I have to wander around to find the right fruit, I'm more likely to try to grow that fruit and bring the wine to me. That's
Right.
That's my side of the story. Again, not an anthropologist. But it is a big argument right now because we're talking about agriculture being invented for the purpose of brewing alcohol.
Yeah, I think that would be a stretch, but I would think that, I have to say that it would be certainly one of the
Influences.
influences.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's definitely an influence.
That's calories.
Yeah.
Desperately short,
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
short.
Well, I mean, once your needs are met in a region, like if you're only having to wander a couple of miles each direction to find everything that you need to survive, after that, you find the next tier on the hierarchy, and that's community. Once your food and shelter and water are met, community comes next, and then entertainment, and there's a lot. But if you're going to find community, you're going to find community through alcohol, and nature provides, but only so much. only that 1 or 2 weeks out of the year where the fruits are ripe, with the right kind of ripe. So, but nature does it all for you. If you put it in a bucket and carry it with you to the next town, you'll be able to get drunk with your new neighbor. So that leads us to intentional production. So by 3150, we have lots and lots and lots of evidence of intentionally made beer and wine. 700 jars believed to have been made and filled with wine in the Levant and shipped to Scorpion the First for his personal consumption. So we have bill of lading for wine shipment by 3150 BCE, which is pretty cool.
They also, we talk about into Egypt, they also imported thousands and thousands of grapevine cuttings.
Yeah.
Try to do their own production.
Yeah. So we get all over the Mediterranean and Middle East. We have lots and lots of wine, mostly wine, being produced out of there, or fruit wines. There are quite a few grain finds, but not nearly as many as fruit finds. So by 1600, somewhere around, we find cereal grains being stored in brass kegs in China, while beers are made from barley and rice and a variety of grasses and fruits all together, because why not? You got lots of sugars, why not mix them all together? Grasses and fruits were predominant in the Indian subcontinent, and are mentioned in the Vedic sagas, some of the oldest religious texts that we have. So they really know what they're doing by then, right? Right. We have a good idea. We're doing it on purpose. There's no way to say we're not doing it on purpose at this point.
Party.
Yeah, I mean there's party here. There's definitely party in the Middle East. Party in the Middle East. By 900 BCE, we have evidence of chicha beer in South America, which is made from corn. It's actually a really interesting process to break down the starches in corn. In fact, it's probably the most scientifically advanced brewing method that we have seen to date, like to modern time. Because what they do when they make chicha is they take a plug of corn meal, they dry the corn, they grind the corn, they take a plug just like you would chewing tobacco, they put it in your mouth and you chew it up. And the enzymes in your mouth and your saliva break down the starches and convert it into salvageable sugars for the yeast to eat. They were doing that in 900 BCE. They still do it today, which is kind of neat.
Spit here.
Yeah, you spit the whole plug into a bucket. You know, you chew on it for a couple of hours and then swap it out for some new stuff, put it in your bucket, add a little bit of water, ferment the whole thing. It's a crazy process, tastes like ass.
Further proof that there are no lethal pathogens that can live in alcohol.
Right, yeah. Somebody'd be getting sick if there were.
I was going there.
That wouldn't have survived if you could get sick off of it. Just gonna put that out there. Give or take around the same time, wine is being introduced in Italy by the Etruscans, however you pronounce it. I'm bad at pronunciations, y'all. Just saying.
Yeah, close.
They begin to practice wine blending, so now they're intentionally trying to make things taste better. By that point, it's not just by happenstance; they're actually trying to enjoy it at the same time. So it's not just effects, but also enjoyment.
Didn't they also have evidence of additives to the wine?
I don't know about that at that point.
Yeah, I think that was very early.
But it was early.
adulterating.
Yeah. Adding preservatives in came much later, but I don't know about adding other additives to make it taste better or perform better.
Columns.
But now I'm gonna go find out things.
Who was the guy that wrote those books? He did Western and Eastern, or he did Western and Eastern, and then he did the Americas. And I cannot remember his name, but he's a anthro-archaeologist, botanist, and he's the one that did the scrapings of the, actually he also got scrapings from the Midas tuneless in
Oh,
Greece.
okay, yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna go look that one up though, because finding additives would be neat at that early stage.
Those
So-
books are a good read.
Yeah, I'll look that one up. By the 14th century, or 4th century BCE, alcohol production is evident on every continent. Many of the larger civilizations began recording laws against excessive intoxication, most notably consumption by lawmakers, except for the Persians, who insisted that if you were drunk when you made a law, you also argued it while you were sober, which was pretty cool. Because they didn't say don't be drunk in Persia. Don't be drunk and making laws now. Just argue it again when you're sober and make sure it makes sense still. Which was kind of neat. So strict Roman anti-competition laws sprung up all over Rome. Anti-competition, you weren't allowed to grow a vineyard unless you were a Roman citizen. Or you could sell your wine or your grape or your must or whatever you were producing only to Rome, one or the other. If you were not a Roman citizen, you had to sell it to Rome for Rome to sell. If not, they would just kill you. As wine spreads across Europe, it gets a little harder to enforce. Wine spreads to France, grape cultivation becomes a big thing. We end up with lots of different science that still comes from that time period. As far as consumption laws go, we had Roman and Chinese laws that prohibit the intoxication of slaves, commoners, and lawmakers while debating. Those are all Chinese. On the other hand, one famous Persian law, I just talked about that. I got ahead of myself. Argue it twice. First drunk, then sober. So we got pretty much any fermentable sugar is converted into alcohol, right? Well, when you separate them into different things, instead of just making a big puddle, we give it names, and mead is one of those things that we call them. We got pottery vessels dating from 7000 BCE in northern China that have chemical signatures consistent with the presence of honey, rice, and organic compounds. It's really impossible to say which came first, mead or wine or beer. It's really hard because we keep finding new evidence every year. There's new vessels that are popping up every year. As soon as we say that honey was the first thing fermented, boom, we'll come up with a grain jar. So what they were doing that early, we don't know, but it's splitting hairs at this point. Mead is one of those things that is one of the oldest. One of those three really old things. Pure honey, add some additives, whatever, call it rice to mellow it out a little bit. Put some other organics in there. This is my nice little picture of Beowulf, by the way. Yo, I just want you to make sure y'all see that. It's a drawing of Beowulf. So the earliest surviving descriptions of mead is possibly the Soma mentioned in the hymns of the Rig Veda, one of the sacred Vedic texts. If y'all don't know what the Vedic are, they're the books that created Hinduism. Yeah, there's a bunch. Hinduism. The Vedics began Hinduism, and they were most notably dated to around 1700 BC. During the golden age of ancient Greece, mead was said to be the preferred drink. Aristotle talks about it quite a bit. He discussed mead in his Meteorologica and elsewhere, while Pliny the Elder, much later, called mead militites in his Naturalis Historia, and differentiated wine sweetened with honey or honey wine from mead. So there's a big difference in sugar or in honey and honeyed wine. And he made that distinction first. And then we got more recipes from Dita Rustica. I've done that one. It's fun. Doesn't taste very good. Beer one of the others that's arguably one of the oldest. Now, I just got beer. I didn't decide to differentiate between types of beer. So anything grain, I'm calling it beer. So anything grain based other than corn, which is chicha. So beer was one of the most common drinks of the Middle Ages. Before that, we have scatterings of evidence and nothing really solid, no processes for what we call beer. We had processes for wine, we had processes for mead. We didn't have any real good processes. We had some sketchy ones that I disagree with some of their redactions. I think they were making soup and it went bad. But by the Middle Ages, it was very common all over Europe. It was produced to be consumed daily by all the social classes in the northern and eastern parts of Europe, and wherever grape cultivation was difficult or impossible. And that line right there has gotten some attention, because we have no evidence that that's why they grew grain. Because you can grow grapes pretty much anywhere. They will grow. They just don't taste as wonderful. They don't produce as much. So, but we do know where they don't grow grapes, they do grow grain. When they do grow grain, they do make beer. Is it an accident? Is it on purpose?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Endorsement and mass production by the Trappist monks of the Catholic Church spread. What did I forget? What's this? What is this?
Looks like a restrainer.
It's my spurs. I'm not allowed to wear spurs. I don't know why she's bringing me twisted up Wyatt. Anyway, the Trappist monks made it very popular across Europe. You know, Little John, Friar Tuck, and all that. Some of those monasteries are still in operation. One day I hope to go to one. But yeah, they helped spread beer and its popularity, and then the endorsement of the church made it okay to drink it. Where other things were expensive, it was okay to drink this cheap stuff. The idea that beer was consumed more commonly than water in the Middle Ages is really just a myth. Water was cheaper, therefore drink water. Why did we build this house so close to that river if we're not going to drink it? That doesn't make any sense.
To make the beer.
To make the beer better.
Of course.
But not near the spring. We don't want the spring's clean water. We want the trashy muck over here.
I've heard where people order the residue from certain wells of
the mineral salts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, basically you take water from this source, dehydrate the crap out of it. Whatever's left, once the water is gone, is what gives the water its flavor. So yeah, you can buy those. I never have, because I don't really care that much to get it, the salt exactly right. But that's pretty much all that's left is minerals and salt deposits. They're not expensive. If you want to play with it, play with it.
Well, you got music water here, so you don't have to worry about it.
Well, Birmingham water is chemically identical to Munich, Germany. So,
Is it Munich?
yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I make dunkels a lot.
Yeah.
And it's hard to beat a dunkel.
I like our water for brewing.
Yeah.
Alabama's got some good water for brewing.
Anston has one of the purest water supplies
Yeah,
in the country.
that's true.
That's not necessarily what you want.
It's
You want a few
you don't-
chemicals. And
right.
That's
You want
that's what I was.
you want more funk and less chemical and less clean.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the order, Kojin. You might be able to help me out with that one. There was the list of favorable water sources that was listed in period, and it's like normal brackish water was the best place to get water. It's just this puddle over here on the side. Rainwater was second, and spring water was dead last. You only use spring water if you absolutely have to.
Well, I think that could be because of the minerals that could be associated with it. There are minerals that can really make your beer
They
not
can do
pleasant.
funky stuff. I'm trying to do I want to do a project with the rainwater. I want to do a 5-year-old rainwater and see what happens. Well, was it Pliny the Elder that did that one in his recipes? 5-year-old rainwater. So I want to try that one day just to see what 5-year-old rainwater brews like.
Sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack you.
Oh no, you're all right. bad medicine. Though probably one of the most popular drinks in Europe, beer was disdained by science as being unhealthy, mostly because ancient Greek and more contemporary Arab physicians had little or no experience with the drink. Now, mind you, Arab physicians weren't drinking. But after 800, they weren't drinking. Well, after 900, they weren't supposed to be drinking. But they had little or no experience with beer either way, because what was popular in their area was wine, because they could grow grapes. So in 1256, I'm not going to try to pronounce that name, that guy right there, it's there if y'all want to write it down, described the nature of beer in the following way. But from whichever it is made, whether from oats, barley, or wheat, it harms the head and the stomach, it causes bad breath and ruins the teeth, it fills the stomach with bad fumes, and as a result anyone who drinks it along with wine becomes drunk quickly. But it does have the property of facilitating urination and makes one's flesh white and smooth. Nah, I drink a lot of beer, I don't see that.
I was gonna say, I need to get busy.
Yeah. I just thought I'd throw that in because it was neat. Back across the oceans over in Mesoamerica, we have the common productions of chicha, pulque, and blache. Blache is basically mead. It's typically honey and some bark. Depending on where you're at, the bark changes. The further south you go, the less bark they use, so it becomes more like mead than anything else. Mexico City, you're talking about cactus bark by the time you get as far north as Mexico City. I have actually had some blache made in Mexico City by shared it with the brewer that made it himself. It was very interesting. Throughout most of Mesoamerica at the time, blache or mead was being used medicinally, along with peyote cactus and other hallucinogens for religious purposes. Chicha was still being made by the Middle East, or by the Middle Ages, when the Spanish explorers returned and let us know in Europe what was going on over there. They were still chewing up corn, which was kind of cool. Pulque is made from the agave nectar, and from pulque we derive tequila once they learned of distillation. It took Europe introducing them to distillation for them to figure it out. But like I said, chicha and blache and pulque, all three have been made from antiquity forward. They cannot tell you anything about them. We don't know. We know so little from their cultures that there was so little that survived. But we do have
no writing.
The what?
No writing for the most part.
Well, they did, but we don't know how to read it. But we do have hard evidence that we can take samples from. This one is a blache cup. It's one of the ceremonial vessels that once they start adding in the barks and making them hallucinogenic, it becomes ceremony. So it's not just intentional, it's ceremonial, which is kind of a big step culturally. Going back to talking about wine, here's I don't know if y'all can see that, but it's that was the cave. Which one is it? Armenia. Which way is it? I forgot to look. Areni, Areni 1, the number 1. Caves in Vayots Dzor, Armenia. So this is this image here is probably really hard to see at distance, but it's a winery. There is no mistaking a winery. Anyone that has ever walked inside of a winery can walk inside this cave and go, oh yeah, that's the same thing. You've got fermentation vats, you've got vats for secondary, you've got places to crush grapes, you've got jars that are designed to juice grapes. And then they find grape branches, they find grape seeds, they find grape residue. Y'all are actually falling asleep. This is cool.
No. There's, In the sediment, they can tell if it's fermented.
Yeah, yeah.
So they want.
There's abundant evidence in this
wine.
cave.
Okay.
Yeah, there's abundant evidence of active fermentation in this cave,
Cool.
not accidental fermentation. So this particular cave, they believe, because it's really hard to carbon date clay, but they believe that it was developed in 4000. This particular site dates back to 4000 BCE. So that makes wine right up there with the oldest. But wine is still accidentally consumed all across nature, so that's evidence of intent. Okay. By the time the Romans got a hold of wine, they started creating new technologies to make their wine either more available, more widely available, or better. And as Rome started to collect new regions, they started gaining new technologies like smokehouses and barrels, glass bottles. Barrels were invented in Gaul, glass bottles invented by the Syrians. Began to compete with terracotta amphoras for storing and shipping wine. Following the Greek invention of the screw, the wine press became common in Roman villas. The Romans also created a precursor to appellation systems. Appellation is the process of pairing grape to soil. So certain grapes grow better in certain soils. They grow more flavorful or more favorable flavor in certain soil. So you put this grape on this soil, you find out that the soil on this spot is different from the soil on this spot. This grape did better, this grape did not. This place is going to flourish. It's natural selection of wine. Where it grows poorly or it tastes bad, we don't keep growing it, we focus. So the Romans kind of figured out how to do that on purpose. And the most famous of those was the white Falernian from the Latian Campanian border, which is somewhere near Milan. It's close to Milan, but those borders are hard to find now because of their high alcohol content. The Romans recognized 3 different appellations on that same mountain. So you had the Causian Falernian from the highest slopes, the Faustian Falernian from the center, and the generic Falernian from the lower slopes and plain. So you had the cheap wine on the bottom, and the higher you went up the mountain, the more expensive their wine got. More expensive, the more sought after. Whether it was better or not, they thought it was, or at least they said it was. Did they actually develop a thing, or did they just develop a marketing ploy? We don't really know that answer because we can't taste their wine. I don't know if I would. But as that same idea spread into Gaul, it actually started to take hold in France. So now we have, I cannot pronounce the word, is it terroir? Terroir.
Yeah.
I'm bad with pronunciations, y'all.
Terroir. I can basically, if you say it,
yeah.
I can say
Terroir. Terroir. So the French took that whole concept to a completely another level. That's why we have names for different wines now. Olive wine is named after either its grape or its region. Pretty simple. French wine spans a period of at least 2,600 years, dating to the founding of Massalia in the 6th century BCE by Phoenicians, with the possibility that viticulture existed much earlier. Over the course of its history, the French wine industry would be influenced and driven by the commercial interests of the lucrative English market and Dutch traders. So they wanted to produce wine as fast as they could and get it into as many hands as they possibly could. Prior to the French Revolution, the Catholic Church was one of France's largest vineyard owners, wielding considerable influence in regions such as Champagne and Burgundy, where the concept of terroir, the complete natural environment in which a particular wine is produced, including factors such as the soil topography and climate, first took root. So they took the appellation system and they made it vineyard specific, where with the Romans they had, this is the mountain, the goods at the top, and it gets more cheap as you go down. They were, no, this side of the river is better than that side of the river. And in a lot of places that's actually the case, is you have one area that's across the river from another area, and this is good wine, this is bad wine. Why? Because we say so. And that was the only explanation given. I've had wines from both sides of the river, they're both good wines. But it did help drive the market, it drove competition, it made for better wines it made for better science, instead of just, everything's the same. There's no homogenizing anymore, which is nice. We all appreciate it. Distillation, I don't want to cover too terribly much, because there's a whole nother class in distillation. Distillation is one of those things that has a mysterious origin. It's been invented like 3 or 4 times. At least, depending on who you ask. Some people believe the distillation of alcohol may have occurred as early as 500 BCE in India and Pakistan. Others will swear up and down that it's 150 BCE, but no one can tell you who started it in that region of Pakistan. By the 4th century CE, the process of distillation is possibly reinvented in Egypt and Arabia. So we've got 3 distinct beginnings of distillation in the same region. So, but by the 9th century CE, clear evidence of distillation of alcohol comes from the Arab chemist Al-Kindi in Iraq, where it was described by the school of Salerno in the 12th century. So we have 9th century, there is definite invention by Arabs of distillation, but we don't get it written about until the 12th century. By the 13th century, fractal distillation was developed, and it becomes a whole nother branch of fermentation science. Whole nother pipe.
Yeah, they don't have to chew the corn anymore.
They don't have to, but they do. That's the coolest part about chicha. They still chew the corn in chicha. You'll have like farmhouses where everyone will just sit around and chew corn and spit in a bucket.
Okay, your resume?
It's neat. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Did I go through anything too fast or too slow? Should I cover something I didn't talk about? I'm a rambler, so I'm more of a Q&A kind of guy.
I still get a kick out of the Americans almost destroyed French wine industry.
The Americas almost destroyed the French wine industry?
Yep.
Yeah, we tried. California definitely tried.
No,
California's still trying.
No, there was a boat that was in the grapes that they brought back.
No.
And it almost wiped out the thing. Matter of fact, the Senior wine grape was thought extinct because of the mold.
Oh, wow.
And they had graft in the fruits of the American plants, put the grape vines on top of that. But they found some over in Argentina.
Okay.
So this was not extinct. There's supposed to be 5 types of wines in the Bordeaux area.
That's neat.
Yeah. Unless you were French.
Yeah. Unless you're the French, in which case you don't like this idea at all.
Oh, dommage. Anyway. Sorry, I rambled too.
Oh, yeah. No, that's what we're here for. We got time, and that's all I've got. Yeah, that's it.
Check on your on your phone, see if you can pull up I cannot remember his name. Dr. something. He's an anthrobotanist.
Anthrobotany. I'll look up anthrobotany.
Yeah. remember his name, but he's got, I think, 3 or 4 books out now on wine. One covers the Levant, and then the other one covers the Americans. I think it's the history of wine or the story of wine.
I've been reading, I can't remember the author, a book called Drink, which is all of the alcoholic history. Unfortunately, out of an 800-page book, only 150 pages is our period. So prehistory through the SEA period. So
this guy goes back to the very beginning.
he's done the actual work on it.
He actually is a archaeologist and botanist, and he took scrapings out of the bottom of pottery shards.
So that's interesting science to me. I'd love to find that.
Okay, I just cannot remember his name.
There's an ethnobotany.
See,
I'm not seeing anything anthropobotany.
look, wine history.
That's a pretty broad topic.
Yeah.
That's gonna get a lot of hits. Wine history book, wine history France. Look at their Wikipedia. We'll get together later. I've got a good source at the bookstore.
Yeah, but it's